It was the kind of summer that draped itself over you like a heavy, wet blanket, the air thick with humidity, and the nights offering no reprieve from the heat. I was living alone at the time, in a small, somewhat aged apartment that had more character than comfort. The place came with its quirks: creaky floorboards, a persistent draft that couldn't be traced, and a landlord who believed more in the power of prayer than in routine maintenance. None of this bothered me. I was fresh out of college, armed with a degree and a boatload of optimism, ready to take on the world from my little corner of it. The first time it happened, I had chalked it up to stress. I was lying in bed, the sheets twisted around me, a thin sheen of sweat covering my skin despite the fan whirring at the foot of my bed. The darkness of my room felt denser than usual, as if it had weight, pressing down on me. I tried to move, to shift my position, but my body refused to obey. My heart began to pound, a rapid drum beat in the silence of my room. Panic clawed at my chest as I struggled to move, to cry out, but my body was a prison, unresponsive. And then I sighted a shadow, darker than the surrounding night, standing at the edge of my bed. It was shapeless, formless, a void that seemed to suck in the scant light that filtered in through the blinds. I wanted to scream, to flee, but I was trapped within my own flesh, a silent witness to this intrusion. The shadow moved, or perhaps it didn't. It was hard to tell. It seemed to pulsate, a breathing mass of darkness, and I felt a pressure on my chest, as if it were physically pressing down on me. My breaths came in short, sharp gasps, my heart racing with terror. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The pressure vanished, the shadow dissipated, and I could move again. I sat up, gasping for air. The after-images of that darkness burned into my retinas. In the light of day, it was easy to dismiss it as a nightmare, a trick of the mind brought on by stress and the oppressive heat. I went about my day, pushing the memory to the back of my mind, convincing myself it was nothing. But as night approached, a sense of dread settled over me, a premonition of what was to come. I was right to be afraid. It happened again and again, each night a repeat of the last. The shadow returned, always at the edge of my sleep, bringing with it that paralyzing terror. I researched, desperate for answers, and discovered the phenomenon of sleep paralysis, a condition where the mind awakens before the body, leaving the person conscious but unable to move. Knowledge didn't bring comfort, though, especially when every article seemed to skirt around the question that burned in my mind: what was the shadow? The terror of those nights began to seep into my days. I was constantly on edge, jumping at shadows, the lack of sleep wearing me down, eroding my health and my sanity. My friends and family noticed a change, expressing concern, but how could I explain? How could I tell them that every night, a shadow visited me, a presence so dark and malevolent that it felt like it was clawing at the very essence of my soul? I sought help, consulting doctors and specialists who prescribed sleep aids and therapy, but nothing worked. The shadow was immune to pharmaceuticals, its visits undeterred by my attempts to banish it. It was during one of these visits, in the grip of that paralyzing terror, that I realized the shadow wasn't just a figment of my sleep paralysis. It was something else, something more. It communicated with me, not through words, but through emotions, waves of sadness, anger, and despair so intense that they felt like they could drown me. I understood then that it was bound to me, a spectral parasite feeding off my fear. The revelation was a breakthrough, but it offered no solace, only more questions. Why me? What did it want? How could I free myself from its grasp? The answer came to me from an unlikely source. An old book on the supernatural my grandmother had given me, its pages yellowed with age, the spine cracked from years of being overlooked on a shelf. In it, I found a passage about shadows, not as mere absences of light, but as entities, drawn to the living, feeding off their energy. The book offered a solution, a ritual of sorts, ancient and filled with warnings of the dangers of meddling with such forces. But what choice did I have? The shadow was slowly consuming me, and if I didn't act, I feared what little was left of me would be lost forever. The ritual was complex, requiring items that were not easily procured and a moonless night to perform. I prepared meticulously, gathering everything I needed: the weight of my decision heavy on my shoulders. The fear of what might happen if I failed was palpable, a constant companion as I set everything in place. And then, on a night as dark as the shadow itself, I began. The ritual was exhausting, both physically and emotionally, a test of wills between me and the entity that had chosen me as its host. As I recited the ancient words, the air around me grew colder, the darkness deepening until I could barely see. The pressure returned, the familiar weight on my chest, but this time I was ready. I pushed through it, continuing the ritual with a determination born of pure desperation. And then, with a final word, it was as if a switch had been flipped. The oppressive weight lifted, and the air in the room lightened, a palpable sense of relief washing over me. I gasped for air, my lungs filling as if I'd been underwater for too long. The darkness receded, and with it, the shadow. In its place, a momentary flicker of something else. Was it gratitude? Relief? I couldn't be sure, but as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, leaving me alone in my room. The silence a stark contrast to the cacophony of emotions that had just ensued. The aftermath of the ritual left me exhausted, lying on the floor of my apartment as dawn began to break outside. The first light of day had never seemed so sweet, so full of promise. I picked myself up, my body aching as if I had run a marathon, and looked around my room. Everything was as I had left it, no sign of the tumultuous battle that had taken place in the unseen realms. In the days that followed, I waited, half expecting, half dreading the return of the shadow. But night after night, I slept peacefully, no hint of the paralyzing terror that had become my nightly companion. It was over, or so I hoped. The shadow, that dark presence, had moved on, released by the ritual or perhaps by its own volition after being confronted. The experience changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. The world seems a little brighter, a little more fragile, and infinitely more mysterious. I've delved deeper into the study of the supernatural, no longer a skeptic but a seeker, aware of the thin veil that separates our reality from the ones that lie just beyond our perception. My story, while unique in its details, is not uncommon. Sleep paralysis has been a part of human experience for centuries, manifesting across cultures and continents. And while not everyone sees a shadow, many feel a presence, an oppressive weight that's as ancient as it is terrifying. My encounter with the shadow at the edge of sleep has led me down paths I never would have imagined, opening my eyes to the complexities of the world around us, both seen and unseen. I share my story not to incite fear but to offer a glimmer of understanding, a beacon for those who have experienced the indescribable terror of being visited in the night. You're not alone, and more importantly, there is hope. The shadows may visit, but they do not have to stay. My journey through the darkness taught me that with courage, determination, and a willingness to face the unknown, we can emerge on the other side, stronger and more enlightened. As for the night, it no longer holds the same fear for me. I've seen what lurks in the shadows, faced it, and come out the other side. Sleep, once a battleground, is now a place of rest, a realm of dreams that are mine once again. But the echo of that experience, the memory of the shadow at the edge of sleep, remains a reminder of the night I fought my deepest fears, and won. I moved to Arizona for the open skies and the promise of solitude. The desert, with its vast landscapes and star-filled nights, seemed like the perfect place to start anew. I found a small house on the outskirts of Phoenix, a place where the city's lights didn't drown out the stars and where the silence was only broken by the distant howls of coyotes. It was my slice of peace, or so I thought. The first few weeks were uneventful, filled with the mundane tasks of setting up a home and getting accustomed to the rhythms of desert life. But then, the dreams began. They were vague at first, mere shadows flitting at the edge of my consciousness. I would wake up feeling uneasy, unable to shake off the feeling that I had been watched. I attributed it to the stress of the move and the adjustment to a new environment, but I couldn't have been more wrong. It was on a particularly hot night in late July that I first experienced what I now know was sleep paralysis. The day had been blistering, the kind of heat that seems to press down on you, heavy and unrelenting. I went to bed grateful for the air conditioning, the room cool and dark, a welcome respite from the heat outside. Sometime in the middle of the night, I awoke to a peculiar sensation. My room was bathed in moonlight, casting long shadows across the floor. I wanted to get up, to close the blinds fully, but I couldn't move. It was as if an invisible force pinned me to the bed, my limbs heavy and unresponsive. Panic set in as I tried to call out, to scream, but no sound emerged from my throat. And then I sighted a figure, standing at the foot of my bed, cloaked in the shadows of the room. It was humanoid in shape but distorted, its features blurred as if I was looking at it through water. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, but its presence filled the room with a palpable sense of dread. I struggled against the invisible weight that held me down, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure remained motionless, a silent sentinel in the dark. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. The pressure lifted, and I could move again. I gasped for air, my body drenched in sweat, the after effects of adrenaline coursing through me. I turned on every light in the house, too afraid to go back to sleep, too afraid of the dark and what it hid. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, a trick of the mind brought on by the stress of the move. But deep down, I knew it was something else. I could still feel the malevolent presence of the figure, its gaze heavy on me even in the light of day. The encounters became more frequent, each one more terrifying than the last. The figure began to whisper, its voice a sibilant hiss that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I couldn't understand what it was saying, the language foreign and chilling. I sought help, visiting doctors and therapists, researching sleep paralysis and its causes. I learned about the phenomenon, about how stress, sleep deprivation, and changes in sleep schedule could trigger episodes. I tried everything, from meditation and yoga to sleep aids and therapy, but nothing worked. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I could feel them worming their way into my mind, echoes of thoughts that were my own. I was losing sleep, the fear of the night and what it brought, leaving me exhausted and on edge. My health began to deteriorate, the lack of rest taking its toll on my body. It was during one of these episodes, in the grip of paralysis and terror, that I finally understood what the figure was saying. Its whispers coalesced into words, a message repeated over and over again: "Leave this place." The realization hit me like a physical blow. The figure, the sleep paralysis, it was all connected to the house, to the land it stood on. I began to research the history of the property, digging through old records and newspaper archives. What I found chilled me to the bone. The house was built on the site of an old mining town, a place with a dark history of death and despair. The town had been abandoned in the early 1900s after a series of tragic accidents in the mines. The land was considered cursed by the locals, a place of bad energy and restless spirits. Armed with this knowledge, I knew I had to leave. The thought of staying, of enduring another night of terror, was unbearable. I packed my belongings, leaving behind the dreams of solitude and peace I had once harbored. The night I left, the air was cool, a breeze whispering through the desert, carrying with it the scent of sage and sand. I drove away without looking back, the lights of Phoenix guiding me to a new beginning, away from the shadows that lurked in the desert night. Since moving, the sleep paralysis has stopped. I no longer wake to the pressure of unseen forces or the whispers in the dark, but the experience has stayed with me, a haunting reminder of the time I spent in that house on the edge of the desert. I've come to believe that some places are best left alone, their secrets too dark to unearth. The desert is beautiful, but it is also vast and mysterious, hiding its history beneath layers of sand and time. My advice to anyone seeking solitude in its embrace: be mindful of where you lay your head to rest. Some nights, the desert whispers, and not all its tales are meant for mortal ears. It started on a night much like any other. In my small, two-bedroom apartment nestled in the heart of a bustling city that never truly sleeps. Yet, in the early hours of the morning, it finds a way to quiet down, a silence that feels almost unnatural. My name is Alex, and if you had asked me about the supernatural or unexplained phenomena before that night, I would have dismissed them with a skeptic's certainty. But what I experienced, rooted in the depths of sleep paralysis, has left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the world around me and the shadows that dwell just beyond our sight. It was around 3 a.m. when I first woke up, or, at least, I thought I had woken up. My room was bathed in the soft, silver glow of moonlight that slipped through the cracks of my blinds, casting long, reaching shadows across the floor. The city's omnipresent hum was muted, replaced by a suffocating silence that seemed to press against my windows, eager to find a way in. I tried to move, to get up and shake off the unease that clung to me like a second skin, but my body refused to obey. It was as if an invisible weight pinned me to my bed, holding me in place with an unyielding grip. Panic began to bubble up within me, its icy fingers wrapping around my heart as I struggled against my unseen restraints. That's when I sighted a shadow, darker than the night itself, standing at the foot of my bed. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination fueled by my half-awake state. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was all too real. The shadow had a form, humanoid but not quite human, with elongated limbs that twisted in ways that defied anatomy. It stood there, unmoving, watching me with eyes I couldn't see but felt all the same, piercing through me with an intensity that turned my blood to ice. I wanted to scream, to call out for help, but my voice was trapped in my throat, smothered by the same force that kept me immobilized. The shadow began to move, its motions slow and deliberate, as if savoring the fear that rolled off me in waves. It edged closer, and with each movement, the air around me grew colder, stealing the breath from my lungs. The room seemed to warp around the entity, the shadows stretching and twisting into grotesque shapes that danced in the periphery of my vision. I could hear whispers then, soft and insidious, slithering into my ears and filling my mind with images of despair and destruction. They promised pain, not just physical but a torment of the soul, a desecration of everything I held dear. Time lost all meaning as I lay there, trapped in my own body, a prisoner in my bed as the shadow loomed over me. It was in that moment, on the brink of succumbing to the terror that threatened to consume me, that I found a sliver of willpower, a spark of defiance in the face of the abyss. With a Herculean effort, I managed to twitch a finger, the slight movement breaking the spell that the entity had cast over me. Like a creature repelled by the light, it recoiled, its form dissolving into the darkness from which it had emerged. The pressure on my chest lifted, the air rushed back into my lungs, and I gasped for breath as if surfacing from the depths of a deep, dark ocean. The room was once again just my room, the moonlight benign and the shadows mere absence of light. I was alone, truly alone, the silence no longer oppressive but a welcome respite from the nightmare I had endured. In the days that followed, I scoured the internet, devouring articles and forum posts about sleep paralysis, shadow people, and the myriad experiences of others who had encountered the inexplicable. I learned that I was not alone, that this phenomenon had been documented throughout history, known by many names but always described with a chilling similarity to what I had experienced. I've since taken measures to protect myself, to ward off the shadows that wait at the edge of sleep. A small lamp now illuminates my room throughout the night, a beacon of safety in the darkness. But the fear remains, a constant companion that whispers to me in the quiet moments, reminding me of the night when the boundary between dream and reality blurred into a nightmare. I share my story not as a warning, nor as a plea for belief. I share it as a testament to the unseen world that exists just beyond our comprehension, a world where the laws of physics and the assurances of daylight hold no sway. It's a reminder that, in the dead of night, we are not always alone, and not all shadows fade with the morning light. Since that night, my sleep has been fraught with unease. Each creak of the house, each whisper of wind against the window, sends a jolt of fear through my already tense body. I've become a prisoner to the twilight hours, caught between the need for sleep and the fear of what awaits me in that vulnerable state. The shadow hasn't returned, not in the form it took that night, but the fear of its return is a constant shadow over my life. I've reached out to others who have experienced sleep paralysis, forming a small but tight-knit community. We share our stories, our fears, and our theories about what these shadows might be. Some believe they are manifestations of our own subconscious fears, while others think they might be entities from another dimension, or even malevolent spirits drawn to our vulnerability in sleep. The theories vary, but the fear, the raw, unadulterated fear, is the same. This ordeal has changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. I find myself looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows that linger just a bit too long. I've become obsessed with the lore and science of sleep, delving into ancient texts and modern studies in a desperate search for answers. But the more I learn, the more I realize how little we truly know about the world of sleep and the darkness it harbors. My advice to anyone reading this is simple. Do not take your peaceful nights for granted. Cherish the calm, uneventful evenings of rest, and be vigilant of the shadows that creep at the edge of your vision as you drift off to sleep. If you find yourself in the grip of sleep paralysis, remember that you are not alone. Fight to move, to wake, but most importantly, do not succumb to the fear. The shadows feed on fear, growing stronger in its presence. As I lay down each night, I wonder if I will once again find myself face to face with the shadow at the edge of sleep. The fear is palpable, a thick cloak that envelops me, suffocating and cold. But I also feel a strange sense of resolve. If the shadow returns, I will be ready. I will not let the fear control me. I will face the darkness with a light that shines from within, a light that no shadow can extinguish. The sun has set as I write these final words, and the familiar dread begins to creep in. But tonight, I will not cower. I will face the night and whatever it brings with a newfound strength. For in the end, it is not the shadows we must fear, but the darkness within ourselves that gives them power. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future videos. Don't forget to like and comment below. See you in the future video.